In the dead of night, as a ferocious storm tore through Redwood Valley, a single desperate howl pierced the chaos. A sound so raw, so urgent, it seemed to carry a message the wind itself couldn't silence. Inside a modest home, a retired police lieutenant stirred from sleep, his instincts flaring one last time. Little did he know that howl would set off a chain of events that would test the boundaries of loyalty, love, and the very definition of a miracle. What happens when a dog's unwavering belief becomes the only thing standing between life and death? Redwood Valley had always been a quiet place, nestled between rolling hills and ancient redwoods that stood like silent sentinels over the small community. On most nights, the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. But on that fateful October night in 2022, the valley was anything but quiet. A storm unlike any in decades raged through the region, its winds howling with a ferocity that bent trees nearly in half and sent debris skittering across the streets. Rain battered the earth in relentless sheets, turning the ground into a muddy quagmire. Inside a modest two-story home on the edge of town, Daniel Carter jolted awake, his heart pounding as if he'd just heard the crack of gunfire. At 58, Daniel was no stranger to emergencies. His 30-year career with the Redwood Valley Police Department had wired his body to react to danger even in sleep. But those days were behind him now, or so he thought. He'd retired 3 years ago, forced out by a chronic knee injury that had turned every step into a reminder of his limitations. The adrenaline-fueled life of a lieutenant, leading hostage rescues, chasing down armed suspects, pulling civilians from burning buildings, had been replaced by the stillness of retirement, a stillness that often felt more like a prison. Beside him, Shadow, his German shepherd, was already on his feet, pacing the hardwood floor with a restless energy. Shadow's dark gray coat gleamed faintly in the dim light filtering through the window, his amber eyes locked on the roofline, as if he could see something Daniel couldn't. A low growl rumbled from deep in the dog's chest, not of aggression, but of warning, a sound Daniel had learned to trust over their years together. "It's just a storm, Shadow," Daniel muttered, ruffling the dog's head as he peered out the window. Nothing but darkness and driving rain met his gaze, the world outside a swirling void of chaos. But Shadow wouldn't settle. The dog's claws tapped sharply against the floor, his body tense, his gaze unwavering. Daniel sighed, a flicker of unease stirring in his chest. Shadow had always had an uncanny instinct, a sixth sense that had saved lives more times than Daniel could count. If Shadow was this agitated, there was a reason. Morning revealed the extent of the storm's wrath. The backyard shed was a pile of splintered wood, and sections of the roof had been torn away. Shingles scattered across the muddy lawn like fallen leaves. Daniel stood on the porch, hands on his hips, surveying the damage with a grim expression. "I need to fix this before the next rain," he said aloud, more to himself than to Shadow, who stood faithfully at his side. Shadow whined, nudging Daniel's leg with his nose, his amber eyes filled with a pleading urgency. The dog tried to block him, tugging gently at his pant leg as Daniel reached for an old aluminum ladder propped against the side of the house. "I'll be fine, buddy," Daniel reassured, offering a small, tired smile. But the words felt hollow, even to him. His knee ached with every step, a dull throb that had become a constant companion. He wasn't the man he used to be, and he knew it. Halfway up the ladder, disaster struck. A sudden gust of wind slammed into the house, the rain-soaked ground shifting beneath the ladder's feet. Daniel reached for the gutter, hoping to steady himself, but the weathered metal crumbled under his weight. Emily, Daniel's wife, screamed from the porch as he fell, his body crashing over 10 feet onto the muddy ground. His head struck a decorative stone with a sickening thud, and the world went dark. Chapter 2. The silent vigil begins. The sterile halls of Riverside Hospital's ICU were a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm. Harsh fluorescent lights cast a cold glow over the room where Daniel Carter now lay, his once vibrant face pale and motionless. Machines beeped steadily, their rhythmic sounds a cruel mockery of the life Daniel had once lived. Emily sat by his side, her hands trembling as she clutched his lifeless fingers, whispering promises she wasn't sure he could hear. Dr. Harris, a veteran physician with 30 years of experience, pulled Emily aside, his voice low and heavy. "We've done everything we can," he said, his words slicing through the fog of her shock. "But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Daniel may not wake up." Emily heard the words, but they didn't fully register. The world blurred around her, leaving only the steady hiss of machines and the frantic beating of her own heart. But while the humans in the room began to grapple with the grim reality, one soul refused to accept it. Shadow, the German shepherd who had been Daniel's partner in every sense of the word, stationed himself at the door of the ICU, his body tense, his amber eyes burning with an unshakable belief. To Shadow, Daniel wasn't gone. He was fighting, and the strongest fighter Shadow had ever known wasn't about to lose. At first, the hospital staff refused to allow animals in the ICU, but after the first night, when Shadow's mournful howls echoed through the sterile halls, breaking even the hardest of hearts, the administration relented. Shadow was allowed into the room under strict supervision, and from that day on, the small ICU room became its own world, a world of Daniel, Emily, and Shadow. Shadow lay stretched out beside Daniel's bed, his heavy head resting close to Daniel's unmoving hand, waiting for the faintest squeeze. Whenever nurses entered, Shadow would shift just enough to allow them to work, his gaze never leaving Daniel's face, as if by sheer watchfulness he could call his partner back. At first, the staff kept their distance, wary of the gaunt, silent shepherd keeping vigil like a soldier on post, but over time they grew accustomed to his presence. Some nurses tucked bits of biscuit into their pockets, sneaking them down to Shadow's paws. Others gently led him to the hospital garden when Emily needed a few minutes to rest. No matter what they offered, Shadow barely ate. His body grew thinner, his once sleek coat dulling with each passing day, but the fire in his eyes never wavered. Each night, as the hospital settled into an uneasy sleep, Emily sat by Daniel's side, her hand wrapped around his, whispering memories of their life together, the laughter, the gardens, and always the stories of Shadow, the loyal guardian who refused to leave. Sometimes, when Emily drifted into exhausted sleep in her chair, Shadow would creep closer, pressing his body against Daniel's side, ears twitching, nose quivering, straining to catch some sign from the deep, any whisper that Daniel was still fighting. In a world ruled by machines and cold statistics, one thing remained constant: the fierce, undying belief of a dog who knew without doubt that his best friend was coming back. As the months dragged on, the financial burden crushed Emily Carter a little more each day. Each morning, she brewed a weak pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the towering stack of hospital bills like a general surveying a battlefield she was destined to lose. Insurance barely made a dent, and the savings she and Daniel had built over a lifetime, meant for sunlit afternoons and lazy mornings, were now little more than flashing red numbers on a bank screen. Emily had left her beloved job at the library to care for Daniel full-time, leaving them with no income.